where you're from. Go for it, please. So.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Castillo. I am a board member. I am a past president of the San Diego Press Club. We're really excited to have everyone here tonight. This is part of our Nuts and Bolts series, which, as we were just talking about, we were doing in person, and hopefully someday we will get back to doing that. But during the pandemic, this is kind of how we've been doing things, and it's been really, really well received. And we're really happy that everyone is making some time tonight to join us by Zoom, by phone, video. As Denise just mentioned, you make yourselves known, network a little bit in the chat. You can ask some questions. I'm going to introduce Cliff, and then he will do a little meet and greet, kind of tell us what he does.
Yeah. Kind of a thing, yeah.
And then we will take some questions. So let me just read Cliff's bio to you guys for any of you.
Sorry, wait, Kristen, just introduce me real quickly.
Yes, okay, sorry. So Terry Williams is our executive director, and she has a little message for us tonight about our awards, which are upcoming.
I finally got the last part of the judging yesterday afternoon. It's been kind of a brutal process, but thankfully we have 15 clubs judging for us. And I've got the last couple of categories in yesterday afternoon. So I started this morning processing it all, and I will be able to send the winners list out tomorrow. And they'll go out tomorrow morning in the Foghorn. So you'll all read that. So it'll be fun. I've been getting a lot of, I'm excited because it's a lot of winners. We had a lot of entries this year. So it's just kind of fun. That's me.
Tag us on social media, and we will all clap for you virtually. And then our awards gala is October 27th, and there's more info probably in the Foghorn as well, Terry?
On that very Foghorn.
Okay. All right, well, let's get to it with Cliff. I'll give you a little background. For those of you who are new to San Diego or just longtime fans, here's a little bit about him. So Cliff has been one of our leading San Diego news personalities for over 35 years. His Cliff Notes on the news commentaries have been heard weekday mornings since 1997 on KOGO-AM. He has won numerous awards for writing and broadcasting, including several Golden Mics from the Radio and Television News Association. His daily news commentaries are part of the podcast for iHeart Radio, and he has been doing breaking news coverage since 1979. He's received honors from the Associated Press, Society of Professional Journalists, of course, the San Diego Press Club, and the National Headliners Club. He was news director at KFMB Radio from 1979 through 1996, director of news and programming at KOGO Radio from 1996 to 2013, and then he returned to KOGO as news director in 2014. And we are happy to have him tonight because, as he was saying before, there's like nothing going on, so he was able to break away. So thank you, Cliff, and I will turn it over to you. And again, if you guys have questions, please put them in the chat and we will get to them at the end of the discussion.
Thank you, Kristen. You do a great job, by the way. Thank you very much. Sure. I'm just going to start with just some big picture thoughts first, and then I'll go through the specific do's and don'ts of broadcast writing, which is what this is supposed to be about. So let's start at the beginning. In the beginning, God created human beings, and they were good. But good writers are not created. To become a good writer, you need to become a good writer. No one is born to be a great writer, no more than Tiger Woods was born a great golfer. And while someone obviously may have talents that they're born with that may make it easier to become a good writer and even a great one, it still takes a lot of work. I was not born as a good writer, nor was I born actually with a good voice for radio, for that matter. Having grown up in Chicago, and if any of you are from Chicago, you know where nasality is as common as organized crime, the mob, in other words, where we drank pop and we loved mom and we rooted for the Sox, that other MLB team in Chicago, But the good news was I got in the theater actually back there in college and took voice and diction classes, and then graduated with a degree in broadcast journalism from Southern University in Illinois, and worked at a few stations there before coming out here to San Diego, as Kristen was just saying. And the point in saying all that, is just that it took a while before I became really any good at doing what I'm doing now in terms of writing. And I'm still working on the craft. And in our business, even though we do speaking and we write for the spoken word, what we do in terms of writing, and when you do in broadcast writing for podcast or radio, whatever broadcast outlet it might be, It really is the key part of what we do. You know what I mean? And I'm sure when I was teaching at San Diego State University for about 8 or 9 years, and then at Point Loma Nazarene, and talking to the students about broadcast writing and journalism and all that. And I used to always use that example of from that 2000 film Finding Forrester, you know, when Sean Connery plays the Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he teaches this inner city 16-year-old kid who would rather be playing basketball, who has a potential for writing, how to write. And that famous line in that movie that he told the kid about was, well, how do I write? He said, the first key to writing is to write. And write and write and write and write and write. And as Kristen mentioned, I write a 90-second commentary that goes out on podcast and on the air on KOGO. And I write it every weekday morning. It airs at 7:25. And I usually don't even sit down to write it until about 6:20 in the morning. I used to write them at night. And I kind of sit there for a while and stew in my head as to what I write about. And I go over and over and second guess myself. And then I started writing just in the morning. And in an hour's time, I was able to actually just sit down, come up with an idea, write it. And it works out a lot better for me anyway. Because when it comes to writing spoken word, again, in the world of podcasting with its radio, TV, it's all about how it sounds, which seems obvious. But to many who do it, it's not. And I end up, when I write and when I teach students how to write, it's all about telling a story. And anybody in broadcasting knows that telling a story is really what you're trying to do, with a beginning and a middle and an end, obviously. And that's really the key to writing for spoken word, because telling, and the key word is telling, not reading. And I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But the words we use in spoken word writing are words that we use when we speak and not used in print or reading. And in writing for spoken word, I, several years ago, started talking about my 3 E's. And this is kind of one of those big picture things, the 3 E's of writing to communicate to an audience in a broadcast, through a broadcast medium or podcast or whatever it is. And the first of those E's is engage. In other words, get their attention. In spoken word writing, radio or podcast or whatever, you're competing with distractions in your listener's environment, what's around them, in their car, in a room, or their inner environment, their thoughts even. And engaging means a good lead on a story that gets attention, and it gets attention and draws the listener or viewer in by leading a listener into the story that you're about to tell them. There was an example just from yesterday, actually, not a big deal story, but it was a good example, I thought. And here's the story. It was about the city announcing that it was resuming enforcement of parking regulations that had been on hold for the last 6 months because of the pandemic. And the story that I wrote was, you may want to be more careful about where you park in the city of San Diego starting tomorrow. That's when the city resumes enforcing parking laws after suspending them for the last 6 months because of the pandemic. And if you'd seen the news release, it was nothing like that, obviously. And the stories that I saw on the City Newswire and on the AP and other wires were not as conversational. And part of engaging your audience is to grab their attention and get them interested in what you're talking about, because you are competing, obviously. The second E is entertain. Now, in writing for spoken word, it's first about getting their attention, but also then about keeping their attention. And we do that in the business by using words that are used in telling a story to someone in a conversation, in a conversational way. And we use the word conversation a lot in teaching people how to write broadcast copy, using words that we use in conversation, not to the point of street slang or committing what I call grammar felony, but conversation. The use of active words, action words, to help move the story along. And what's most important, I've found as well in writing to an audience and a listener and a viewer, is to put yourself into their head of the person that you're talking to and find ways to talk to them. Think about what it would be like if you were them and if you were listening and hearing this story, what you would want to hear about it. What would you want to hear about next? If what you're hearing is interesting, is it presented in an entertaining way? When I entertain, I don't mean, you jump up and down or you wear funny clothes or anything like that. It's just keeping their attention. It's almost like if you think back to your favorite junior high or high school teacher, the one that you really liked. Probably one of the reasons you liked that teacher is that he or she was able to keep your attention because they were entertaining. Not necessarily funny. They didn't make you laugh necessarily. They might have, but they kept you entertained and kept you engaged. And here's a story of a very hard news story we had this week about the real bad accident, the fatal accident up in Oceanside Beach yesterday. And the lead on the story was a deadly tragedy on an Oceanside beach. That was it. That was the lead. But then the rest of the story was something that the writer pulled, I believe, off the city news service or an AP wire and used on the air. It said, police report the incident occurred shortly before 10 a.m. when a tractor involved in a dredging project proceeded to hit a woman who was seen sleeping on the beach near the Oceanside harbor. Now, I rewrote that to say, a woman sleeping on the sand near Oceanside harbor was run over by a tractor that was being used for dredging. And obviously, when you listen to that read on the air, it has a very different sound. It's far more conversational, and that's what you try to do. And that moves us along to the third E, which is enlighten. Because only after you engage and only after you entertain through your telling of the story can you really accomplish the last of these three E's, enlighten. In other words, inform, explain, reveal something interesting and or important that is what you're trying to do in communicating whatever story that you're working on. So these three E's of writing, engage, entertain, and enlighten, are one of those things that I used to post actually in our newsroom and put them up there as just a reminder to everybody in terms of when you begin to write a story, what you're thinking about. How to be a better writer is being a better storyteller in our business. And again, in writing for spoken word, and I'll keep saying it, it's all about telling a story, not announcing a story, not pronouncing a story, not reading a story. It's all about telling a story. And that's why these three E's actually kind of coincide with a commonly taught method that has been used in teaching broadcast writing that goes back to the Walter Cronkite days, actually. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them again. It was something used by a lot of broadcast journalism professors and teachers back then that is still in use today and very helpful. And in fact, good storytellers know how to effectively communicate facts and ideas to others a lot better than people who don't write as well, because again, you're competing for somebody's attention and concentration, and you can only do that when you engage in a relationship with them and have that conversation with them. It's all about having that conversation. What I've done to help train students who are in journalism and broadcasting at both State and at Point Loma was I had, on the first day of the class, I asked all the students to bring in their favorite children's book, their children's storybook. And they all looked at me like I was weird or something. But I told them, bring it in the next class, and we're going to do something with it. So they brought in their books. And the first thing I did was, okay, what I want you to do is read the first page of that story out loud in class. And they all did. And then I said, okay, your assignment for the next session is to rewrite that children's story into a news story, a 60-second news story, telling the same story in a way that you are using conversation and natural words to tell a story to a listener or a viewer. And it was a great exercise. They had a lot of fun doing it. And it was the kind of thing that gave them a little bit of an idea of how to take situations and turn them into stories that can be told in a way that can help you be a better writer, obviously. All right, there are some do's and don'ts, and I want to go through those now, and you can jot them down or just, put them in your head and hang on to them. But every story you write, well, there was a motto that we've used in our newsroom, and it goes along this way. It says, tell me a fact and I'll learn it. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story that'll live in my heart forever. It's an old motto. And as writers of broadcast copy, this helps us be storytellers, because every story that you write needs to have three distinct different layers to it. The first of all, the top. I talked about the lead earlier, but you put your best stuff in the first line. It doesn't tell the whole story. It just tells enough of the story to grab the attention. And part of that is understanding as a writer why it is that they should even care about the story. What is it in that story that you, in your judgment, could determine is most interesting and important to your listener, the person listening to your story? In other words, hook the listener by giving them some of the story, but not all of the story. As you tell a story, if you ever read a children's book, it's exactly what happens. As you turn the page, the first sentence leads into the second sentence, which then leads into the third sentence, and then leads into the next page. And that's kind of how a good story goes. And that's the middle of these three distinct layers. And that's basically where you tell them the story. And when we write stories, and I tell people in our newsrooms through the years, is once you write that story, you read it out loud, which is critical in writing done for to be spoken. Read it out loud, and then go back and edit out some of the words that are not needed to make it even more concise. And then, of course, at the third part of the story should be that ending where you basically either give them the bottom line, the conclusion, or just a wrap up and a reminder of what you just told them in a different way. And the next do when it comes to writing for broadcasting that I've always used is, and you've heard it before if you've taken courses like this, is write like you talk, or write as you talk if you want to be more grammatically correct. We always try to imagine that we're having a conversation with a friend or a neighbor, and that what we write is relatable because it is conversational. And that means you avoid technical or complicated words and words that people don't use. And you unfortunately see them way too often and hear them way too often in broadcast copy. From the word officials and authorities to the felony word brandished, a weapon, fatally injured, slaying, altercation, apprehend, allegedly, pursuit, mayoral instead of running for mayor, and one of the favorites of all times, gubernatorial. And the second favorite is blaze instead of a fire. When I teach students, I said the first thing you need to do before you write that lead is to say, hey, you, put in the name, whatever name you want in there. Hey, you, listen to this. And if your lead, the first thing that you say, naturally flows out of, hey, you, listen to this, then that's the way you want to handle it. That's the way you want to do it. And you have to almost vocalize that. I used to have the students do that, and people in our newsroom do it. Put up in front of them saying, hey, Fred, listen to this. Hey, Mary, listen to this. And speak it out loud and come up with that first sentence of your story that actually makes sense if you're having a conversation. And of course, you always want to write simple sentences. Keep thoughts to one per sentence. Avoid long sentences, complicated sentences, the ands and the but and the meantimes and the whiles and everything else. I mean, we never lead a story with a preposition. While, meantime, those kinds of things. Because we don't really use those in conversation except when we're trying to stall from saying something else. And obviously numbers should always be rounded off. That's kind of one of those basics things. And here are 3 don'ts, writing don'ts. You never want to start a sentence in broadcast copy with a direct quote. It's always better to use a paraphrase as to what the person is saying and then get to the quote. For instance, President Trump says he loves people who are white supremacists, or using a bad example. and then you put, as he put it in the debate, and then you can use the quote. And then, of course, you also don't want to use fancy words to impress, so to speak, or arcane or overused cliches in stories. You want to, again, be conversational. Always be conversational. And of course, when it comes down to writing, it always comes down to what you're in the bottom line that you're trying to do or trying to accomplish, that your mission is to be credible. And to be credible obviously means that you need to have the facts. You need to state them clearly. You need to explain things easy for people to understand, because credibility is really your primary product when you're telling stories that have to do with news events. Never say more than what you know. Say as much as you do know, but never speculate in a story, never guess, and never try to be cute. And there's a lot of cute writing that goes on in broadcasting, and people almost chuckle about it. And it's okay to use some cute writing in a cute story or a kicker kind of a story. But typically, you hear a lot of these tired cliches and cutesy kind of things that you want to try to avoid. Because again, it's just not something that you use in conversation as a way of having a relatable conversation with somebody, that you want to have a conversation with. The one thing that I did want to kind of close these comments with is writing well is not easy. And a lot of people think it is easy. I mean, you can write a story and it won't be very good and it's pretty easy. But writing well takes work. It will become easier as you do it and you learn it. But I know that anybody who cares enough to do what they're doing, it's a very satisfying experience when you're in the business as a writer. And you know that you've written something really, really well, whether it's short form, long form, news story, a commentary, a longer form kind of a feature. You know when you've done it, and I get kind of a rush out of it afterwards, where, man, that was just I really nailed it. You don't do it all the time, but you try to nail it every time. And most of all, to be a good writer, to be more broad and scope this down a little bit in terms of what's most important, you have to really care. And I find a lot of people in the business don't care enough. They settle for less than they can do well. And obviously, when breaking news happens, it's all about speed and getting things out of the air, and there's no time for as much creative writing. But the more you write, and the better you get at it, it's just like an athlete who practices, and the more reps you do, the better you are at it, and it all ends up happening more naturally in becoming the kind of writer that you want to be. And with that, I'll answer any questions or comments or anything else.
Take a couple from the chat for you. You were just talking about writing cute and how you're not a fan of that. So someone asked, Sandy Young asked, what's an example of being cute in writing that you often see?
An example of it? Yeah, it's one that you see a lot, or I hear a lot, I should say, is something along the lines of, Kristen, if I were doing a story, let's say about the mayor announcing some sort of about let's say the garbage pickup in town, something like that, and you'll say something about I've heard people say stories about that. We've got a trashy story for you tonight, or that kind of thing. Just really simplistic, juvenile kind of things, that you hear. And then, unfortunately, the person always smiles and thinks they're really clever about it. That makes me more ticked off about it.
So would you just skip it all together, or is there another way that
yeah,
try to be clever?
I would skip. Yeah, I would. What you're. It's not going. Look, I mean, in terms of attracting people, keeping them engaged, and keeping them with you in a story, a lot of these people who hear something like that, you're going to lose their attention because they're going to get stuck on the joke or the one-liner that you used, and miss out on what it is you're trying to tell them in communicating to that story.
One of the other questions we had, you were talking about rounding up numbers or rounding down.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of that? So,
Well, yeah, I mean, you hear it all the time from Times. I love it when you hear it. I've heard this. The accident happened at about 9:42. Okay, an accident doesn't happen at about 9:42. And it really isn't important if it happened at 9:42 unless it's an investigation story about, the evidence and that kind of thing. But no, it happened just before 10 o'clock. It happened about 10 o'clock. At 9:42 is not, but just after 9:30. Rounding off time is a lot better than the exact time, unless the exact time is important. And the same thing with numbers. I mean, we're every day reporting numbers of the coronavirus cases and those kinds of things. And you'll hear sometimes 14,593 cases. That's fine if you are making a point of the exact number, but otherwise you'll normally see a little over 14,000 or about 14,500 even, or something like that, And that's what I mean by rounding out and either up or down, but just making it easy. Because again, if I was telling you a story, I said, so how many cases are there in that bushel that you have of whatever that you have? Well, there's 1,473. Most likely we just say it's about 1,400,
All right, going back, I've got a question here. Someone asked, and I'm not sure, they might need to drill down a little more. It says, give us examples of writing for membership organizations and local news media. So
writing for membership, like a PR kind of a thing? What do you mean?
I mean, obviously you're talking broadcast writing, but I'm not sure.
Right.
Other.
Well, I mean, look, if I get news releases and messages in essay or email form from different organizations and all, and there are really good ones and there are ones that aren't so good, and it's the same basic approach. You're still telling a story. That association newsletter or an association news release should have the lead material at the beginning, obviously, and go through the story and keep you entertained and keep you engaged, that you're willing to even spend the 2 minutes to read it. Because time is so valuable, and I say we're competing with people's time, especially in broadcast and podcast writing. You don't have a lot of time to mess around. You've got to get their attention right away and tell them the story. And you see how quickly broadcast outlets go through stories. I mean, there are time limits on stories, nothing more than 15 seconds, nothing more than 20 seconds, whatever it is. And you sometimes think that the people you're talking to out there in the audience have the attention span of, a 6-month-old. The way we treat them. I know I sometimes find myself watching TV and listening to the radio saying, wait a minute, you didn't tell me anything. You know how it is. Yep. We tease a story for about an hour and then show little clips of the video. And then we finally pay off. Here's that story we told you about. It's the same clip of video. It's the same words. There's nothing new. You've just been manipulated into listening or watching for the next hour. That's all.
The person clarified, and they said they would like to know your perspective on the value of belonging to a membership organization, such as the Press Club.
Oh, well, I think it's, oh, well, gee whiz, I belong to several. That's good. Oh, I think it's great. You know, one of the greatest things is we all know anybody who belongs to these kind of organizations is you gain so much, not only through formal workshops or trainings and that kind of thing, but just by sharing experiences with people. We do that in the Press Club, any organization, any professional organization. It's a huge benefit. And you obviously able to network, and networking is important, especially these days where jobs can come and go very quickly. Networking is always important. And it also gives you some confidence. I know I love hanging around other broadcasters and other journalists because it kind of gives you a kind of a reassurance of what it is that you do is really important and a lot of fun. And sometimes we can get bogged down in the job and the frustrations of the job. And when you hang around with people who are in the business with you, I think it just lifts your spirits up a little bit.
We've got a couple other questions in the chat, but kind of following up on that, Cliff, I know a lot of people are looking for jobs right now. In terms of if you're going to, you know, submit for some of these jobs, what should they be looking at when they're submitting writing samples?
Things that are unique and creative and show me that you're a really good writer, because what I'm going to look at, I'm going to assume, as everybody does, this is the best you can do. And sometimes you get a stack of sample stories that people have written, and they don't put them in any particular order, and that's to their detriment, because most people like myself, a news director, or anybody who does the hiring, looking through material like that, you may not make it to the third or fourth or fifth or sixth example. If something doesn't catch your eye and impress you immediately, then you know, you could end up at the bottom of that stack and never be reviewed again. I remember several years ago, somebody was applying for a newsroom job, and she wrote on her little email letter opener, basically said something along the lines, as I recall, I am willing to call police and fire agencies and scan the social media every hour of every day in order to get the news until I turn blue in the face, or something like that. That was how she led off her email, as opposed to saying, I'm applying for a position and I'm here to help your organization, and your typical kind of thing. It was unique enough to get my attention that I kept reading. I ended up hiring her, actually.
Wow, very cool. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. How much long form writing have you done, and is it different for you compared to your broadcast writing?
I've not written my novel yet, no, but I have. I have a plan to, because my best part of the day is the day in the morning that I write my commentary. That's just a couple of minutes long, obviously, but I love to do it, and I've talked about compiling, you know, my favorite commentaries over a period of time, and had some offers to do that, but have not done that yet. I love to read great stories, and I do a lot of reading of novels, you know, spy novel kind of things. I would love to write a longer form of product, but of course, doing what I do for as long as I've done it, where basically I'm on call 24/7 every day of my life, it's hard. That's why I'm really disappointed I can't go on a cruise, because the cruise is the one place that I can go, a cruise ship, where it's very difficult to get involved in breaking news and contact. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to do that.
We'll just make your Wi-Fi go out somewhere and say, we can't reach him.
I know. Okay. You're really desperate. You can connect, but it's harder.
You were just talking about your Cliff Notes, and there was a question here on how you decide on topics for the Cliff Notes.
Life events. I never know what I'm going to write until Usually that morning, I've thought about it the day before, a couple of things. My wife will say something, a friend will say something. I'll see it just a headline. This morning, I wrote about the unprecedented debate in this unprecedented year where 2020 has become synonymous with unprecedented, you know. And I just scanned quickly the headline on the Union Tribune, little quick descriptions, a half a dozen to 8 descriptions of how the debate was described. One word: raucous, chaotic, that kind of angry, contentious, those kinds of things. And as I was scanning, I saw, of all things, Pope Francis's audience, papal audience last night, just hours after the debate. And he's talking it last night, as I was reading this morning, about coming out of the pandemic. We don't want to go back to the normal that we all think we want to go back to. We'd like to go back to something better than normal, where we approach each other. He used the word tenderness in his address. And I kind of compared the word tenderness and a new normal coming out of this abnormal to words that were described the debate last night, and how unprecedented the debate was, and how unprecedented the pandemic is, and just the connection and all. And I closed it out by saying, and I wonder if Pope Francis happened to catch that debate last night.
It was very tender.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see what else we've got. It says here, when you're editing one of your stories, how do you decide what to throw out if you can't cut enough extra verbiage?
You can always cut a word or 2 or 3, always. And in fact, when I go through my commentary, I write it and just throw it out there. And then I go back and I edit out words, because I have a time limit. I know how many words that I can have, I don't go over 250, 260 words, depending on the nature of the way I have to read it. But there's always room to make a story shorter. And I've had this argument with news people where I'll say, well, I couldn't take that out. They would, and then I'll show them, I'll take a word out, and it didn't make any difference. You can always edit down the copy. And with the time restraints that we all have in the business, you've got to be concise. And I'm a big believer in a lot of respects. Talking and writing is less is more, and that is true. Less is more. Edit thyself. That's the one thing that I coach on-air people more than anything else with, is edit what you say. The length of time it takes for you to say it, the amount of words you use to write it. Less is more. I mean, I'm probably talking too much right now, but when you go to a cocktail party and a conversation, who's the first person that people turn away from? The one who never stops talking.
One of the follow-up questions to that is, can you ever cut too much?
And can you ever cut too much? Well, yeah, you can cut too much if you cut too much for people to understand the story. You know what I mean? I mean, that would be obvious. If you leave out, if you're doing a story about an accident and you leave out the number of cars involved, or if you're doing a story about a baseball game, obviously you can't leave out the score. I mean, there are key parts of the story that have to be in there. But there's always, I'll challenge you to find any story where you cannot edit out 2 or 3 words, at least.
Do you have a favorite story that you've written over the years?
Oh, wow. A favorite story. Wow. That's
Or a really hard one, something that
yeah, that's a good question. Favorite story, I think. I guess one of my favorite stories I've ever written is about Dr. Seuss, and using a little bit of Dr. Seuss rhyme in it as part of it. That was a fun one. I think the hardest story probably has been some of the pandemic stories we've done with people who have lost their jobs. We did a profile on a couple that we interviewed, and this woman had lost her job. Her mother came down with COVID and died, and it's a difficult story to tell because it's emotionally difficult when you're interviewing somebody like that. Because I've gotten tears in my eyes when I sit down. I do long form interviews every week. And, there are times when I get tears in my eyes because I can feel and see, if we're in person, the pain that person's going through. Those things make it difficult.
Okay. We've got a question here. How do you balance good and bad story topics?
What was that? I had some chatter in the background. I missed you. What was that question?
In the car or something. The question was, how do you balance the good and the bad of different story topics? So I guess you don't have a segment of all bad ones, and you wouldn't have, all good.
Well, I guess it comes down to relevance. You gotta know who you're talking to, and so decide who your audience is. Know your audience. Know who it is that you're trying to communicate to, and it's all about relevance. And there's a lot of stories that we as a business do in the news that are not all that relevant necessarily. But sometimes a story can be important and a story can be interesting. Sometimes they're both. Charles Osgood used to say years ago, our job is to make the important story interesting and the interesting story important. An interesting story. There's a lot of human feature and entertainment stories that are interesting. They're certainly not important. I don't need to know that some celebrity has bought a new home or whatever. I mean, it's not critical to my life, but it's interesting because of the size, the cost, who it is, and that kind of thing. So you try to write it in a way that makes it interesting. And then just off the top of my head there, imagine having $1 million and being able to buy a new car. What car would you buy? Well, so-and-so just bought a Lamborghini for $600,000 or whatever it is. I mean, that's one way of kind of relating a story. That's not all that big of a deal. And then there's a lot of important stories. I mean, talk about one of the hardest stories to write locally, and I've found it recently, is the 101 Ash Street story. The building that with the contract and the city and the lease and the money wasted and the audit that was done. And I mean, that's a really difficult story to tell in a short form in a broadcast kind of a newsroom. That's really left for the Voices of San Diego and the Union Tribunes and that kind of thing to actually explain a story like that. But it's an important story. I mean, it is an important story, absolutely. And you got to find a way to make it interesting. So you kind of narrow it down, and the shorter the better. Basically, the city taxpayers, it's cost city taxpayers X number of $1 million for a building that nobody's occupied, and kind of approach it that way.
How is it changed at all now that we're social media and that sort of thing? I mean, what is the viewer or the listener feedback? How does that impact what you're writing? Or
we get feedback from listeners all the time. It doesn't really impact what we say, because working at a station that has a lot of conservative talk, and we're hearing from some people who don't like when we say anything terrible in our newscasts or anything that would be perceived as negative about the president. And we avoid the conversations. There's no reason to be having conversations like that. But social media has changed pretty much everything in terms of not only where we get the news and how we get the news, because we do get a lot of the news initially, breaking station like we do. I follow Twitter a lot, and I retweet a lot, and I send out tweets a lot, because our job is to be a breaking news station, and social media has pretty much changed everything. And I also think that I do spend time looking at the top, what's trending on Twitter, what's trending on Facebook. And that plays a role in what we decide to do, absolutely.
Okay. Kind of getting back to the writing and style and that sort of thing, do you ever use a thesaurus? And how do you keep your words and your writing fresh?
We do use a thesaurus. We search for synonyms on the online, and the deal is that when you look at a thesaurus, you don't always find the most conversational word. You find a lot of words, but not necessarily the most conversational word. And I have had these conversations over the years in the newsroom where I'll say, "Look how you put this. All right, now I want you to tell me the story in your own words. What happened?" And 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't use half the words that they used in the story in just telling me the story in the conversation. And that's what I found to be the best way of finding the right words to use in a story.
Kind of dovetails. We had a question here about who are some of the best broadcast writers in San Diego? You've been here a long time. I suppose.
Oh boy, yeah, the best one.
How to be, read that writing and get inspired.
Yeah. I was gonna say the. I think if I've got to name a couple, who I used to love going back some years, was Hal Clement, but the current crop, the current crop of writers, yeah, that's tough. It's nobody in my mind kind of stands out, to be honest with you. I wish I could give you the name of one. I can't. I don't want to make one up. That's because nobody.
I worked with Hal Clement. He really worked at it. Really was a craft.
He did. It was a different time, and there was more time, and it was different. But it was, it takes an effort. It takes effort to be a good writer. Like I was saying before, it really does.
Is it difficult knowing that there's, like you're saying, there's social media, there's so many TV stations in town? I mean, to make KOGO and your voice and everything, is it more distinctive? Do you feel that competition, or are you just doing your own thing and not worrying about competition?
Oh, I worry about competition all the time. I mean, KPBS is a different than us. So it's two different kind of products, obviously, not only with fewer commercials and the longer approach and all that. I mean, our brand is breaking news, and I do focus on breaking news. We pride ourselves on, if it's a small brush fire along a freeway ramp that is sending up a little smoke and causing a little bit of a traffic backup, we will lead with that story for that next half hour, for the next newscast, because our rule, we had all these earthquakes, in fact, this afternoon out in Imperial Valley. My rule in the newsroom is we need to be on the air. There goes another one up down in Baja, 3.5 down in Baja. We need to be on the air with the earthquake within 2 minutes. So I'm talking about the one that is felt, not just a 3.0 earthquake, but one that is likely and is felt. We have to be on the air within 2 minutes. That's the rule that I have in the newsroom. And I don't care how, and tweet it out as well, as quickly. And I don't care how we do that, whether it's by somebody just calling in a phone and getting on the air. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have a broadcast line in my house, in my office, with this microphone here. And so I can go on the air and have for many, many times over many, many years, in the middle of the night when we have an earthquake or a fire or a brush fire and all that, I can do on the air from home. And of course, we have wireless connections into the studio that we get on the air immediately. So that's what we try to do. And then once we're on the air with breaking news, I don't want anybody leaving us. Our job is to basically make sure that we're there for people. And I've been very proud of the staff because they know that what our job is at our particular radio station is to not only inform people, but to calm them down, not get them excited. I get a little ticked off at people who tend to sensationalize the breaking story. There's a way of telling a very big story in a calm way that does not generate any more tension or anxiety than people already have.
Okay, thank you. By the way, how many people are on your staff? You mentioned your team.
We have 10 people, including me. And that includes our morning team of 4 people, 2 anchors, 2 hosts, a producer, and a reporter. And then 2 anchors in the afternoon, 2 reporters, one afternoon, one in the evening, and then an overnight person. So
we've got some more questions coming in. Do advertisers ever complain about your coverage, say that you have a bias?
Oh yeah. We hear from the right that we're not left enough, and we hear from the left that we're not right or too right enough. And it's a constant battle to appease people, which we're never able to do. But and I have conversations with them. All calls or emails or posts on the website that we get are referred to me, and then I engage, because I don't want the news people engaging, because there's nothing good to come out of that. And so that way I can, because my job is to keep them listening, but also explain to them what we're doing and why we're doing it and what we're saying about it, and that kind of thing. So, but it does affect when you work in the environment that we do with 6 hours of conservative talk every day, with newscast top and bottom, and the 4-hour news show we do in the morning is totally, we want that to be appealing to all viewpoints. Obviously, that has no slant at all from 5 to 9 in the morning. And but we know that our listeners lean more conservative than liberal, just like KPBS knows that their listeners tune more liberal than conservative. But we both try to do the same thing, but present straight information, fairly, well balanced, with the facts involved, and not let listeners dictate what particular slant we should take on something like that. So.
All right, we've got one more question, and then I think we're almost going to wrap it up here. What are your thoughts on the trend of saying things like "you guys" instead of just "you," or grammatical errors such as "the couple were" instead of "the couple was on vacation," as well as?
I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm all for conversational, but it started years ago. Hey guys, hi guys, hey guys, and then there's the and there's the like, and there's the pronunciations, mountain instead of mountain, fountain instead of fountain, and different things like that. But yeah, there's an informality, which is fine, but the unneeded words, the the likes, the wells, it's very difficult to eliminate those, because they become so much part of our language. And I've tried to train people using pauses and silence to try to help them listen to themselves, so they know what it is that I'm talking about in terms of using those kinds of unneeded words. Kind of like when people like to say, well, it's like kind of this, if you know what I mean. Like, it's this neck, and you hear it. It's everywhere, isn't it? I mean, it's everywhere, and it's very irritating. 2 months ago, I was watching an anchor on CNN on the weekend, and she was interviewing people, and she used in almost every sentence. And I recorded it. I grabbed my phone and I recorded a video of her doing this. And I sent her a 2-minute chunk of this. And I said, you may not realize this, but did you know that you say, a lot, And I
Are we frozen? Okay, now I can hear you guys again.
Yes, I think he froze.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we'll get Cliff back. If not, we're almost at the top of the hour. There you are. You're back. Is he?
Cliff was on the edge, and I know that's cliche.
Okay. Well, if Cliff gets back, I want to hear if that to him. At any rate, let's hopefully we've got a couple more minutes. I want to remind everybody, as Terry mentioned earlier, tomorrow, check your email. The Foghorn will be out with our winners list. We're really excited. It's going to be a great year. For our show is coming up October 27th, our awards show. It's also our big press club our big meeting of the year. So that'll be a fun one too. We have 2 upcoming events, and you are welcome to attend. They're both on our social media and on our website, so please RSVP. The first one we've got coming on October 8th. It's a Thursday. As Denise mentioned, it's kind of our fall meet and greet. This is kind of a new thing for us, but it's going to be really fun. So we'll meet up like this as a Zoom meeting, and then we're going to have attendees kind of randomly be assigned kind of to a little networking room. So that should be fun. Again, it's free for members. Then we have another event coming up on Tuesday, October 13th. It's another one of our Nuts and Bolts series. This one is with Richard Lederer, language columnist for the Union Tribune. He's the usage editor at the Random House Dictionary and author of The Right Way. He will offer Press Club members a common sense approach to grammar and usage. We will find out where you stand on terminal prepositions, split infinitives, floating adverbs, and they as the third person singular pronoun. Dr. Lederer is the author of 50 books about language, history, and humor, and he will welcome our questions about grammar, usage, and punctuation. So that should be a fun one. Again, you can register for all of those on the San Diego Press Club's website. There's links on our social media as well. Speaking of social media, people were asking about Cliff. You can follow him online. I think it's in the chat here. He is on Twitter at, what is it, SD News? Is that the word here?
Mr. News. And it just he's dialing back in.
Okay,
So let's give him another moment.
I want to hear the rest of that story. It's a good
Hello, I'm back.
You're back. Okay, so
I
finish.
don't know what happened, I don't know what happened except one of those earthquake alerts came in, and I tried to swipe it away, and I think I closed it down. I'm sorry. Stupid me.
We did a little housekeeping and reminded everybody about upcoming events, but we want you to take us back. So you had commented to one of the.
Oh, so anyhow, yeah, I sent it to her, and I never heard from her. I never heard from her. She never responded. I sent her a follow-up email, and she never responded. So,
Wow.
and by the way, she's still doing it.
Well, at least you made her aware of it.
Yeah, I felt the same way. At least it was off my chest. Now when I watch her, there's nothing else I can do. I throw up my hands, and I'm always amazed though that nobody ever tells her anything like that.
Maybe we're all too afraid. That's kind of let's close out on that question here because we are at the top of the hour. What's your advice for, finding mentors in the newsroom or, professors, that sort of thing, who can help guide at any age of your career, any age and stage?
Oh, it's great. That is so important because I've had them through my life. When I was working at smaller radio stations, I got to know people who had been in the business for a long time. I went to association, got involved in association. The Press Club is a perfect example of a place where you can go, where you can get to know people. And I've had conversations myself as I've gotten older. People have come up to me and wanted to get some input and all that kind of thing, just as I did when I was 27 years old and new in the business and trying to make my way through and move forward and figure out how to be like that person, kind of a thing, because you look up to that person. And it's so important to get to know that person and realize that they're not these, broadcast gods up there. They're actually people that you can talk to and learn from. It's critical, though. It really is critical. Too many people think they know it all, and none of us knows it all.
All righty. Well, thank you, Cliff, for making time for us. Thank you, everyone, for attending. As I mentioned, we've got another Nuts and Bolts series coming up on writing. These are ongoing, so please continue to check our social media. We've been having a really great attendance during the pandemic. And again, we look forward to having them in person. But in the meantime, stay safe, everyone, and we'll hope to see you at our next event.
And thanks, Kristen, for being such a great host.
No problem. Anytime. This is fun.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Terry.
I should say I had to unmute myself. Good to see you, Jane. Yay.
I'm in my very messy office. I just got new ink toner for my printer, and it's like everywhere because I have to figure out how to do it. Anyhow, thank you very much. It was fun to pop in and kind of.
Yeah, our pleasure. Our pleasure. We're really proud of this series. It's been really, really awesome.
Well, if you ever need someone who does sort of what I've done, then let me know.
Actually, send me an email and I have a little folder to remind myself of that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
night.
I'm going to end the meeting.
Okay.
See you soon.